So we'll talk about xAPI today. xAPI is a standard that's emerged not as recently as you might think, as a matter of fact. But what it's trying to solve is a problem that's really not a problem. What I mean by that is we've always taught people in a lot of different ways. We've always had approaches to teaching, if you go back to ancient times, that involved talking to one another, showing people things, demonstrating, trying things out, failing, correcting failures, all of that sort of stuff. It's an innate part of training. And then the world got exciting. Back in the 1980s, we started looking at digital technology to deliver training. Partly because it saved money, but partly because it's scaled. And there are particular places where it proliferated, and one of them is aviation. Now, if you're a manufacturer of airplanes, you buy componentry from a huge number of people. If you're an airline, you buy planes and spare parts from a very large number of people. And if we go back to the 1980s, all of those people supplied their training that goes with their componentry in a digital way, and they would say, right, here's the course, and also you have to buy this platform that we've got that will play it for you. So just imagine what that was like. You would have dozens of platforms just to train your staff. They wouldn't talk to each other. And soon enough, the aviation industry in particular said, enough is enough. And they said, we're not going to buy your planes anymore. We're not going to buy your components. We're not going to buy your services unless your courses work this way. And so they developed a standard for their own industry called the Aviation Industry CBT, computer-based training. And AICC was first released in 1998, and at that point there was effectively a boycott within that sector of anyone that made courses that would not talk to an AICC learning management system. And it put a rocket under manufacturers, and they had no choice but to change all of the courses they made such that they would work with learning management systems that worked with AICC standards. Well, it was a great idea, and not surprisingly, pretty quickly all of those manufacturers started making all of their courses talk to AICC learning management systems. And the rest of the world said, what a great idea. And they started boycotting anyone that didn't do AICC as well. So fairly quickly, AICC spread from aviation to everyone. Now, as part of developing this standard, though, the aviation industry didn't have much in the way of needs. And what's more, they wanted to make it easy to comply with. They didn't want to create a hurdle for their suppliers. So AICC really didn't try to do very much. It really put out a standard way for courses to report pass or fail. That's it. Didn't do very much. It just simply recorded pass and fail. So now everyone's got a standard, which is great. But what happens when somebody wants to do more sophisticated training? And the people that came up with that question in a formal way were actually the United States Department of Defense, who wanted to record a little more than simply pass and fail. They wanted to know, for example, where are you at inside your course, so that their learning management system could relaunch the course where you left off. They wanted to have information about how people went on particular questions. So you knew where people's strong and weak points were, and you could also improve questions. You know, if people consistently getting things wrong, you could look at that question and focus on training around areas of weakness, that sort of thing, and improving the course. So the Department of Defence said, we want to know more than that. And so what they did is they set up a working group. And the working group was tasked with finding a better AICC. The working group was called ADL, or stands for Advanced Distributed Learning. But it was actually part of the American Department of Defence. And ADL was asked, come up with a better AICC. ADL still exists. It's been around ever since. It's become the de facto e-learning standards organisation. So ADL got together, and in 2001, 3 years after AICC, they released the first version as an experiment of the Shareable Content Object Reference Model, SCORM for short. Shareable Content Object Reference Model. A very big mouthful. But the idea is it's going to collect more information. SCORM 1.0 was an experiment. Later that, or 1.0 and then 1.1, by later that year, at the end of the year, SCORM 1.2 was ready, and that was the first version that ADL made widely available. And to this day, that standard from 19 years ago remains the workhorse of training, e-learning. So ADL's SCORM 1.2 is still by far the most popular standard, but it's not the most recent. The next problem was that courses themselves were getting very big. People were building great big monolithic hour-long or multi-hour-long courses that had lots and lots of content in them, and then the next time they built a course, they didn't have pieces of the first course that they could easily start with. It was really hard to repurpose material between one and the next. So ADL decided to solve that. They needed a nice way to allow people to build their content as little pieces and instead have a simple way of sequencing them so that you could build all your little bits and build your course by saying, I want this sequence. So you could keep a library of components together. And to do that, in 2004, they came out with SCORM 2004. Now, you'll often see learning management systems supporting 2004. There are many that do. But you know what? It gives us a good warm inner glow, and we don't use it. Yes, that's true. Even those courses that you go and buy that say, hey, this is a SCORM 2004 course, it probably is. But you know what it's doing? Almost always. It's still a monolithic course because that sequencing thing that came with SCORM 2004, no one actually uses it. You look inside most SCORM 2004 courses and you know what it says? My sequence is this one object, bang. So we still build our courses just like we did with 1.2. We package it up, we name it 2004, and we don't take advantage of the 2004 editions. And virtually no one does. Even those courses you get that are SCORM 2004, it's probably in name only. Because it's a bit complex to sequence stuff. However, SCORM 1.2, SCORM 2004 together changed the world. changed the world. We began to report. We ran reports for our organisations on how training was going and what we were spending on it and what people were engaged with. We accredited people and accreditations set up centrally so that, you know, in Australia we've got government regulation for accreditations. We measure people and we set certificates around achievements. All of that was made possible because of our newfound way of recording results. Not just e-learning, of course, but the LMSs that came out now were able to accredit people on a mass scale. They delivered tests, so for the first time we had mass testing. If you think HSC and VCE and all of those things are done by hand, well, only part of it, not very much of it. All of the accreditation and testing that we do these days is styled around computers because of what SCORM did. We certified, and for a change we started to recertify. The first CPD programs, I worked on some of the early ones. They came out largely as a result of LMSs. We've forgotten that now. But CPD idea grew out of the fact that we had ways of easily certifying and knowing when to recertify people. We tailored content, that is, we created courses that would have one version in French and a different version in English, or we had courses that had the section for the manager and the section for the staff member, and the system would decide which one to deliver to people, and we tailored courses based on your seniority or your role. Things became standardised rather than the old way of training people such that we had a good trainer if you were lucky and a poor trainer if you weren't lucky. Stopped happening because now we can standardise. We can make sure everything's, all the messaging is the same. We ran surveys when we trained people to find out what they thought about it, how well they'd learned. We started measuring the effectiveness of the courses themselves. We centralised stuff. We created new jobs like with new titles like Learning Management System Administrator or People and Culture with a training bent. We authorised things. You know, people could no longer just run off and do training. Oh, no. They had to put in an application to attend training. Those were processed through our LMS. We defined things. We defined particular competencies. So rather than saying, oh, somebody's competent, oh, no. We needed to have a specific definition of what that competency entails. And we defined what it means to be a certified electrician or a certified childcare worker with working with children checks. All of those sorts of things. We started putting structure around what it was we wanted people to know and demonstrate. We also created theories such as Kirkpatrick, and we all know all the theories around training that have emerged in most recent years. What we probably know less of is the fact that a lot of those theories have come out of the data that was being collected by learning management systems and analysis of that data leading to us developing new thinking around the way we train. So even stuff that wasn't delivered through LMSs, a lot of the research papers came out of analysis of LMS data. In short, we built structure around training. The whole idea of associating data with the training we do comes from school, and the access to that data changed the way we train. But there was a problem. We'd forgotten something. All of these pictures here, all of this type of training is data, but it's not being collected. The only data that we collected easily was data associated with training we were delivering through the LMS. Yet pretty much all of history has gone by. Human beings have walked this planet for over 1 million years. And all that time they've learned things. And do you think they needed an LMS to do it with? No. So all of the training that we human beings like to do had been forgotten. And we locked ourselves into a paradigm where we assume there will be data. And if there's not data, we won't do it. So we found ourselves doing less and less showing, less and less doing, and more classrooms, LMS, e-learning. Obviously not to the exclusion of everything else, because people still have to learn in multiple ways. But we'd forgotten about it. What was really amusing to me, and I wrote a blog article saying, with the title, "What it tells us when we invent a term for the bleeding obvious." The term 70-20-10 goes back to a research paper by McCall, Lombardo and Morrison. And they said, 70% of what we learn by doing, trial and error, 20% by being mentored and 10% in a formal way. Well, yeah, I think the cavemen knew that. I think that all of the people that trained anyone up to the first LMSs knew that. It's interesting that it became 70-20-10 became such a thing. I think that the really interesting thing about the word 70-20-10 is not the fact that it tells us where people learn, but the fact that we need to say it. The fact that we had forgotten where people are really learning. Well, before I go back to my story, I'd like to ask you a question, a reflective question. Let's suppose you were applying for a job and you had 2 offers. The first company has this form of induction. They're going to, run a webinar, you're going to log into the LMS, you're going to do a tour of the plant and equipment. They'll have some classes and some e-learning courses to do, and then probably some advanced courses on particular areas to do with your role. You're going to then listen to a recorded webinar. You might do an actual face-to-face webinar, and then you'll do a multiple choice quiz at the end to show that you've done it all, and off you go. The second company that offers you a job, they say, right, well, we're going to give you a tour. Let's sit down and talk about the benefits package that we're going to offer. You're going to meet some of your colleagues, have a chat, perhaps attend a webinar and a class. Let's do some rating of what your experiences are. You're going to observe people on the job. You're going to participate. Somebody's going to help you do some tasks. Then we're going to assign you a coach, and that person's going to follow you around for the first 3 months. You're going to job shadow somebody. We're going to assign you an expert. You're going to do some reading. Which one of those do you think is going to be better able to get somebody job ready? And by the way, which one would you prefer to do? Now, it's interesting when you ask this question. It's not as clear-cut as you might expect. If you ask this in a room of people, you actually find a significant number of people put their hand up for company A. More people put up their hand for company B. But you know what the divide is? It's really stark. The people that put their hands up for company A, you then ask them all, okay, stand up. Now, sit down anyone who is a learning management system administrator. And you know what? They all sit down. Everyone who is a learning management system administrator is more likely to gravitate to A, but pretty much no one else will. Why? Because they look at that and they think, I understand how to work with it. I can do all sorts of things with that sort of training. And by the way, I think it works really well. And sure, it can. If done well, absolutely it can do a good job. But the majority of people who aren't familiar with that, who don't have that perspective, opt for company B. The reality is that we humans, given our druthers, will opt for a range of forms of training. We're not being given it. So the idea of training people in those medieval 1960s, 1970s style was anathema to some, was anathema especially to those people that process the data. I've depicted it here as a bean counter, which is a bit unfair because I'm one of them. I reckon that gives me the right to say it. So I'm one of these people too that wants data. I know the value of information. I know how it can improve our training, how it can improve the relevance of what we deliver to people, and how it can assist us to do our jobs well. But I'm initially going to resist any temptation to move training outside of a structure. So really, the world came to a halt. And the Department of Defence said, okay, well, let's put the band back together. Let's get ADL onto the job and see if they can find a way to quantify 70-20-10. Let's get the best of both worlds. Let's have some way of measuring training outside the LMS. And so ADL met again. Half of them had retired, but these old people that had developed a version of SCORM most recently in 2004 got together in 2013, 2012. And, they looked at it and they looked at it and you know what they said? Too hard. No idea. They didn't have any idea how they could possibly take SCORM outside a structure, outside LMS. So their solution was to go to a tender. And the tender was won by a company called Rustici. Now, Rustici actually happens to be one of my suppliers. They're now owned by a very large conglomerate called LTG, Learning Technologies Group, that sells learning management systems such as Net Dimensions, PeopleFluent, and they own Instilled, which is the learning experience platform, and they own all sorts of things. They own courses, and they own Rustici. But Rustici, at this point in history, was a company on its own, owned by a gentleman by the name of Rustici, who was an ex-academic. And he took up this challenge. How are we going to take SCORM outside of the classroom? Decided not to do it. Let's not replace SCORM. SCORM's had its day. No, that's wrong. SCORM hasn't had its day. SCORM should sit alongside something else. SCORM's really good at learning management systems. Why don't we have something else for the non-learning management systems? Interesting idea. And in 2013, Rustici came up with this idea called, wait for it, Tin Can? Right. Project Tin Can? It was called Tin Can. The thinking was it was meant to be a two-way conversation. It does sound like a nerdy thing. So it was an awesome idea, but a bit of a pompous name. So if we return to our history, the last step is tin can got crossed off fairly quickly and replaced by the Experience API. An API is something that talks to things. That's what API means. Talking to all the things around your workplace and looking at your experiences. It specialises in experiences. It's the Experience API, or xAPI for short. That came out shortly after Tin Can. So let's think about how you might do that. Here's a workplace. Here's the sorts of things that people do when they come to work. They might do an e-learning course, or reading a report, or designing a presentation, or they might use some data or a system, they might mentor someone, they might even win an award. There's all sorts of things. And all of these things that people do are worthy of recognition. Furthermore, they're educative. They demonstrate skills and they bring skills. They teach people things. These are the activities we want to know about. And Rustasy looked at all of that. They looked at the workplace and they said, hey, why don't we break it all down to little sentences? 3-word sentences. This person, name, passed, read, correctly used, won, mentored, designed. That's a verb. What did they do it with? An e-learn, a report, a colleague, an award. The green things are the object. We have a subject in yellow, a verb in blue, and an object in green. Nice, simple English language sentences. And that is all xAPI is. Reduce our activities, our achievements, our knowledge to 3-word sentences. I have to collect them somehow. I have to send them too, but we'll come to that. Starting with the collection. That's where a learning record store comes in, LRS. You'll hear the term LRS increasingly. An LRS collects information from all over your office and outside. I've seen LRSs collecting records from a motor vehicle about how good somebody's driving is. So-and-so maintained lane, or so-and-so indicated 20 metres before intersection. Can be done. Now, all of that sort of stuff needs to go into a system called an LRS. The LRS is a fairly simplistic system. It's not like an LMS at all. An LMS delivers content to you. An LRS doesn't. It sits there listening. It's a database that receives all these 3-word sentences from things. And the only smarts in it is analytics. The ability to draw conclusions, draw graphs. I've seen one LRS in Queensland set up with artificial intelligence. It's receiving information about students across a university doing all sorts of things as they study. And it's looking at all of those 3-word sentences and plugging it through artificial intelligence to say, this particular student is likely to fail, and warn the lecturer in advance. So they're predicting people's actual end results long before they emerge, before they sit any tests. They are looking for warning signs that no human could find. just because of the way these students behave and knowledge of behaviour of students that preceded them. Based on all that, the university is hoping to get the academics to intervene and help students before they even realise they need help. Pretty smart stuff. An LRS is not a content delivery platform. It's a smart analytics platform. As I say, I'll come back to how we get that information, but before we do, I just want to show you this. This is what xAPI promises to the world. Obviously, 70-20-10, we've spoken about that. But the idea of continuous improvement, let's think about that university. How much more continuous could the improvement be than to detect a student that's likely to struggle before they even begin to struggle? So continuous improvement, finding ways to better help our learners, to look at how a course leads to changes in behaviours when the person leaves the classroom, when they go back to their desk. If we can measure their before and after performance, we know this course has had an impact. But if we can compare that to perhaps some alternate way of training people, we know which forms of training work best, and we can improve our training. And of course, the inevitable ROI issue. Now, the problem that we trainers have had for as long as we've had this role, which really is since we've had LMSs, is being able to explain to our organisation in terms they're prepared to accept just how much of a difference we're making to the organisation. You know, it's easy enough to say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. marketing person, how many eyeballs did you get this month? Or, hello, sales, how did revenue go against budget? Or, hello, human resources, how did our retention rates change this month? Most of our parts of our organisations have got things they can quantify. Trainers have never had a really good way of doing that in a way that links those results to the organisation's goals. We can say people are improving their test results or that the feedback forms indicate they like our training. Yep. But so what? It's really hard to link that to the goal that the organisation has set for us, which generally is phrased in terms of, I want this increased performance. We may believe, we may even think we know that our training leads to improved performance. But can we persuade? Well, if we can start measuring not just our training, but on-the-job performance, then we have real measures of ROI that are the sort of things that lead to improved training budgets. We all know that first against the wall in difficult times is training. This is why xAPI is our solution. I've mentioned CQ University in passing. They're talking about predicting outcomes. A bit of a shout out to our Western Australian contingent today. I think that what West Australia's Department of Health are looking at is also really, really clever. The idea is, hey, we've got hospitals all over the state. We've got medical practitioners who move between hospitals, so their training records exist in multiple places. but the LMSs don't talk to each other, and there is no one place that's got all the training records for a practitioner that works in more than one place. So why not tell each of those LMSs to send 3-word sentences about who did what on the LMS to an LRS that listens to all of them. You could integrate them, sure. You can integrate the hospital's LMSs together. You'd have to do that for every hospital, and it would be quite a big job. Much easier not to integrate them and simply to have them all send their results in a new way, xAPI, to an LRS. Really easy. No integrations, cheap as chips. Hardly need a budget for it. And the last one that I think is rather interesting is a totally different one again. The CFA in Victoria, who is the Victorian equivalent of New South Wales's RFS, they fight bushfires. CFA has a real problem. Like firefighters, generally they have for years used foam that has carcinogenic chemicals in it. So all of those firefighters that were trained over the last generation have been exposed to serious carcinogens. But the worst thing of the lot is there is no record of who was exposed. They continue to use dangerous chemicals and they've learnt their lesson. The CFA now want to keep records like this. Person attended dangerous location. Person used chemical. And then in years to come, if we learn that those chemicals were hazardous, or if that location is associated with some sort of health problem, they can trace it. Monitoring where somebody did their training from a health perspective. What's really lovely about xAPI, what I love about it, is that it started off with one idea, and look at the range of brilliant applications people are finding already. It's so versatile. Okay, I mentioned that we come back to sending the data as well. So to get going with this, you really only need 2 things. An LRS to store your data and get your various systems to send those 3-word sentences, xAPI. This sounds like a big issue. It's not. And the reason it's not is this. There are some really good free LRSs out there, like really, really good free LRSs out there. And what's more, a lot of the systems that you're using now already talk xAPI. You might know it. It's not something that people tend to shout from the rafters, but you know what? Microsoft Teams that we're using now to meet with one another is going to have its xAPI implementation within weeks, within about a week now. A lot of systems are out there doing xAPI right now, and what's more, if they're not, they soon will, and they certainly will if you contact them and say, you know, we need you to be talking xAPI. Remember that story right at the beginning, my first slide, the aviation industry? What happened when they said we're not going to buy your system unless it's AICC? That's what's happening with xAPI right now. We're not going to use your system unless it talks to our LRS, translates to a very quick bit of action. There's a URL down there that leads you to a list of some of the adopters. It's a much shorter list than the actual one. There's a lot more people out there that have adopted it, but it tells you some of those that have. But I tell you what, if you've got a system that doesn't talk xAPI, your next phone call is to the vendor because they will. That's the experience. It's happening. Okay, so where do we get started? People on this, members of the xAPI users group, and if they're not, they should be, join. Just have to go to xapi.org.au and it's free. And in the members area, we've got an xAPI playground. You can build your own xAPI statements. And you know what? We've set up a free LRS for you in the site. You can create your own statements and see the LRS receive them. Doesn't do a great deal of analysis. It's just there as a playground. But you can actually do it from the members area. You can do the whole thing. Go and have a play. Once you're ready to try it, grab a free LRS. Veracity is the one. This QR code, if you photograph it, you'll get these slides later. This QR code will take you straight to Veracity's website. Veracity is the LRS I like. It's got a paid version as well, but the free Veracity is a pretty good one. There are some other good ones as well. I think Watershed is not bad at all, and Learning Locker is the one that gets all the press. To be honest, I managed to get Learning Locker running within a day. I got Veracity Learning LRS running within half an hour. Watershed is also very good, but it's a very sophisticated paid system, and it leaves an awful lot of its functionality for the paid version only. The free version is very, very basic. So for those reasons, I think if you want to start with a freebie, I'd start with Veracity. A lot of people are Learning Locker. It's kind of, you know, who you talk to. So that's my thinking. I think it'll take you a bit more work to get Learning Locker running well. And of course, as members, we're putting together the xAPI cohort. Now, the best xAPI event in the world runs every 3 months in America and is a virtual cohort, and it is heaps of fun. People form little groups and come up with an xAPI project, and they build it together, and they report back every week about progress, and they listen to workshops. It's all free. Last time I did it, there were about 700 participants. It was really big, but they built some amazing stuff. Like, there was a website that was built using xAPI that monitored preschoolers, you know, and they were sending sentences like, Mary ate banana. Johnny slept well. You know, and they were measuring who played with whom. Friendships. Nutrition. Childhood achievements, if somebody tied their shoelaces or successfully used the toilet themselves. All of those sorts of things. They were sending xAPI statements. You might wonder how on earth. Well, they did it with, in this case, they needed to do it with mobile phones. So the messages are sent by pressing a button on a phone. So yes, there's a human intervention, but that's okay. So this was doing analysis to inform parents and in this case actually grandparents mainly on how these children were going. That was so awesome. So some really interesting projects came up. And there was another project that was measuring the ability of a disabled person to use a multimedia course. So what they'd done is they built a virtual world, and this person had to use a mouse to manipulate some objects in it. And they were sending xAPI signals about how well this person was able to manipulate an object with a mouse. And it was giving real-time information about the motor skills of somebody and helping to improve those outcomes. Really sophisticated stuff. But, you know, I've seen some really awesome stuff in courses too. For example, we put videos inside e-learning all the time, and the perennial complaint is, oh yeah, but I don't know who actually watched it. Did they fast forward or did they skip topics? You know, my course is only ever going to tell me if they launched it. Yeah, that's true, because your course is SCORM. SCORM has a limited vocabulary. One of the things it has in it is that somebody launched an object. There is nothing in its vocabulary for watched an object, fast forward an object. xAPI, remember, is completely extensible. So people put in that sort of vocabulary with their videos, and suddenly you can track whether somebody is doing those things, whether they're actually taking your information in. Where do these vocabularies come from? The original idea from xAPI was that each industry would come up with its own vocabulary. So they had this slightly Pollyanna-ish view of the world that suddenly every sector of the economy would come up and enthusiastically draft their own xAPI vocabulary. It didn't happen. So the Rustici ADL group now is developing them in conjunction with sectors, so they're emerging. But you are free to use your own, and if there is something you would like to record, go right ahead. You can define your own statements. Okay, but I would strongly suggest joining the Aussie xAPI cohort team, because we're going to be doing it on our time zone, West Coast, East Coast Australian time zones, and we're going to be working as a team on a project together. And what's really cool about it is that you will find that some of the people in your xAPI cohort have never used xAPI before and don't know what it is, whilst other people have a commercial LRS set up and have been doing it for years. The range in skills is dramatic. It's for everyone. It's brilliant. And so join the Aussie xAPI cohort team, no matter what your skill level. There is no fee. Let's show these yaks what we Aussies can do. So this is me, and if there are any questions, feel free to type them into the chat window or turn on your mic and ask me. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now so that I can view questions, and we'll see how we go. All right. Looks like we don't have any questions today, so I'll give it a wrap, and I'd like to thank you very much for your attendance. See you at the next one. Bye now.